and just it makes it much easier to get that through hole heated up properly. You can also use a desoldering pump. That's a pretty popular method too. It's just so hard to get that solder flowing, get the pump working on these, that I've just had to, and the braid's really cheap too, so cheaper than a pump, cheaper than a manual or electrical pump. And the results of this are going to vary depending on your model, depending on the design of the jack. Sometimes this is a really easy process, or considerably easy. Sometimes it can be incredibly difficult, and I have to use a hot air soldering station to kind of finish off the job. I'll get as much solder out of it as possible, but even using the flux and the solder and the braid is just not enough. In this video I won't be using the hot air station, but that's a common thing that I do in my videos. So here I'm just trimming off the excess wick. And another technique for this, sometimes it works on the first pass, but if you find yourself not being able to get much solder out, try the flux and try the solder again. I know it sounds counterintuitive to add more solder to something you're trying to remove, but adding that solder and that flux really just gets that whole entire through hole heated up and gets that old solder flowing out of there properly. Sometimes it takes a couple passes for you to actually get all the solder removed. And another technique too, just flip the board over. You can start removing solder from the other side. Sometimes that solder just does not want to come off on one end. I'm constantly flipping the board back and forth, using the solder iron to remove it that way too. As you can see, I got some of that solder up on the other side that wasn't coming. And this depends on the design of the jack. You can't really do the back pins on this one from the other side. There's some delicate surface mount circuitry there that you don't want to damage. I do it a little bit on the voltage pin on this one because it is kind of exposed. There's enough space to get my soldering iron in between that back voltage pin without damaging anything, but it just depends on your make and model. And now that I got a bunch of the solder removed, sometimes it needs to kind of be wiggled a little bit to get it to come free. You can see that it's obviously really loose there. If it's not loose whatsoever, or slightly loose or whatever, you don't want to do this wiggle trick. You can rip that through hole right out of the board, and this has enough solder removed that it's just kind of slowly coming out. No damage to the through holes in this case, but make sure you watch it when you're doing this. It's not something that you want to force out or rip it out. It's something that should come out pretty easily, like it did just there. So now I've got the old jack removed. Need to still do some more cleanup on that solder. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It just depends on how much solder is left in that through hole. But you want to get, even when that jack's removed, it's good to do some more desoldering. Sometimes that jack can be hard to go in if all that solder isn't removed perfectly. So. And here I'm just taking some 99% alcohol. Just going to clean up the board, clean up that flux, and get it ready for the new jack. So as you can see here, you can see through the through holes. Most of the solder is removed. So now I got the new jack here. Make sure you put it in on the right side. A lot of the times you can't put it in wrong, but there are some jacks where they're uniform and you could potentially put it in on the wrong side, so just make sure you're conscious of that. And as you can see, when I lift up the board, it kind of falls out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the handle of this cutter here and put it underneath to keep it flat or flush with the board while I'm doing the new solder job. You don't want that jack to go in at an angle, even at a slight angle. If you, let's say it's at an angle when you solder it back in, it can be enough to where you put the laptop motherboard back in the chassis, and it's kind of blocked by something, by the chassis, and the power cord won't go in if it's at an angle. So you want to make sure that it's nice and flush. And so now I'm going to add some more solder to the jack. Just using my finger there to make sure I'm keeping it flush. And here I'm just checking the other side to make sure that solder is flowed through properly. You want to see kind of a little bit of solder coming out on the other side. That just ensures that you have a good connection and it's gone all the way through the through hole. I'm just taking some more 99% alcohol, just cleaning that jack up, making it look nice. And here's the finished product. It's ready to be reinstalled back into the chassis and put back together. Nice fresh DC jack with a good connection.